would like to present Rainmaker. He's the man behind DCRainmaker.com, which focuses on endurance sport technology and training, and was ranked as one of the 50 most influential people in running by Runner's World magazine in 2015. The site produces the most in-depth reviews and analysis of sport technology products out on the web today, gathering more than 3 million viewers per month. You can follow him at DCRainmaker.com. Please welcome, from DC Rainmaker, Rainmaker.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much again for having me. I'm super excited. I know I stand between you and a lot of beer on a mountaintop, so hopefully we'll get to the end of this. One quick note is that we are live streaming it, so if you decide to streak the stage, it's going to be a little iffy. On the flip side, for those watching on the live stream, the lighting isn't necessarily awesome on that stream, I get that. Audio hopefully is good. In the video, we will find out. So we're up in the Canadian mountains, and we're doing it over LTE because the hotel Wi-Fi is about the speed of like a 1998 modem. So bear with me. If it doesn't work out, we'll upload the full thing afterwards so everyone can watch it later on in full high-quality awesomeness. So with that, if I can get someone to press the button, that'd be great. The button pressers. There we go. Okay, so obviously people at home can't hear me that I don't have any sound, but sorry about that. So a bit about me, a bit about DC Rainmaker. I've got a couple intro slides just for those that are not necessarily familiar with it or with me. So I now do this as a full-time job. I actually write sports technology stuff as a full-time job. I'm kind of like a pro cyclist without being very fast. So basically, I just ride and run all day long and write a bunch about it. I'm also a bit of a triathlete. I live in Paris, France, so not the Texas version, but the French version. And I've been there now for over 5 years, which is kind of crazy. And I've got a wife and one baby, and another one just about here as well. So definitely busy. The site started 10 years ago. In fact, 10 years ago this September, which is crazy to me. I realized that at Eurobike just on a whim, which is kind of nuts. And it's really about not only in-depth technology reviews, but also me. And I think that's what makes it a little bit interesting, is it's not just tech stuff. It's also like what I did this weekend or what I've been doing, a ride that I may have done, something really, really cool. And so the goal is to go ahead and just have it be across the board, things that are vaguely sports tech related. Reviews, of course, are the primary driver of traffic to the site. About 4 million views per month. Roughly half of that, or about 2/3 of that, is unique people per month coming by, and across all different categories. So it's not just necessarily super high-end cycling devices and stuff like that. You can see some stats there on Facebook and Twitter and all that jazz. One thing that commonly pops up, especially at this event, is how revenue occurs on the site, because a lot of people might want to know that. It's all affiliate links, so not with individual companies. I don't do any advertising with individual companies that I review either. So things like Amazon and stuff like that is how I get my revenue. You can see ads on the site, but it's only for what you've been searching on. So Google basically looks at you and says, oh, you've been searching for Victoria's Secret, you're getting Victoria's Secret ads. Toilets, you get toilet ads. It's really simple that way for me. And it also means I don't take any money from anyone in this room or in the entire industry at whole. A bit about the reader. So one of the biggest misconceptions that I hear commonly is that it's about endurance fitness geeks, or it's about people on the pointy end of the spectrum reading the site. And in reality, that couldn't be further from the truth. It's actually the majority of people that read the site are for mid-range devices. They're mid-range devices down to $100 Fitbit type devices. That's the bulk of the traffic these days. It's kind of nuts. And a kind of funny stat I shared yesterday in a review of the Garmin's new Disney Vivo basically junior thing, Disney Active Band, is that the most bought item on the site last holiday season was the kids activity tracker. And the real kickers didn't even write about it either. So that's like, it just shows you people are coming across all sorts of different spectrums to see products, and it's not just the pointy end of the spectrum. I have, a lot of the followers I have are people in the industry like yourselves. They're newspapers, they're media outlets or TVs, all that kind of stuff. So it's more than just normal consumers following. The same goes for industry analysts. I spend a lot of time talking with industry analysts, Wall Street analysts, about what the sector is doing and kind of giving them my thoughts on how things move. One of the cool things that we do every year, I do every year, is I have the DCR open house in Paris in the cave, so people can come down and check out the full cave that you may have seen. It's underground. It's where all my lab and studio is, and we go for a run in the morning. It was a particularly miserably cold day this year, and then we have a big party at night with a whole bunch of people that come by. So if you happen to be Paris in December, that's the time to be there. So we're going to start off, this is kind of like a year in review presentation. So essentially what's happened in the last year and what's going to happen over the next year until next year, essentially. And there's no better way to start that than to talk about who died this year. And so this is the wall of who we lost in the sports tech world in the last year. We start off on this side here, and somewhat recently, we lost Recon Jet. Recon, actually not just Jet, but the entire brand of Recon. They were bought by Intel a year or two ago, and that didn't really work out that well. And then over the last few months, we just lost the entire Intel wearables division all by itself. So 800 plus people essentially gone, which is kind of crazy in the wearables world. Shows you it's just not that easy. You can't, you have to have a passion for wearables, a passion for sports tech to get into that. BSX Insight actually also bit the dust in the last month or so. Not well publicized, but that's now gone. Jawbone Wearables, of course, they found out that you have to be profitable at some point in your lifespan, and that if you don't pay your employees, then they don't work for you. So they had that lesson. A CompuTrainer, of course, is one of the icons in the indoor cycling realm, and for them, they just didn't innovate, right? They simply assumed that having a product that was 20 years old would carry them for the rest of their life, and they called it quits this past spring. Brim Brothers, tried for many, many years and was someone that came here as well to the symposium, and then eventually hit the point where they learned, like everyone else knows, and they probably know more than anyone else does in this industry, that power meters is hard, really, really, really hard to do correctly. In the same way that Adidas learned that wearables are hard. Adidas exited the wearables industry and is now looking to do partnerships, partnering with other companies opposed to doing their own. And I still think we have a couple that may call it quits by the end of the year. We've got LVL, which is BSX's spin-off on hydration. That's a whole pile of messy right now. Mio Wearables is one that there's been a lot of talk about that being kind of on the deathbed. Same with Mio Cycle. You have to eventually create products. You have to generate products out there. If you don't create products, then people can't buy products, and people can't buy products, then you don't get money. And if you don't get money, you end up like Jawbone. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then TomTom. TomTom's in a really tough spot right now because they've had a bunch of rumors over the past summer about their impending death or sell-off or whatever you want to call that, and they've done nothing to counter that. And so that's why they've earned this spot on this list, is that, as a brand, if people are saying you're going to die, and that's like the front page of the newspaper in the Netherlands, then you should put something out that says you're not dead yet. And if you don't do that, then there's no other way I and any other consumer can interpret that other than you're dead. Like I can't recommend someone buy a TomTom device at this point because maybe they won't be here in a few months. And so it's really important to make sure you counter those sort of things if they happen. So in 2017, I would say the biggest theory or biggest kind of constant was stabilization. Stabilization of the industry across a lot of different areas. And that doesn't mean there wasn't innovation. There was lots and lots of innovation, but there wasn't the kind of innovation that we saw in 2016 with all these new products. Tons of new trainers, tons of new power meters, advances in action cameras and drones, and running stuff. It just exploded in 2016. 2017 was a bit of everyone kind of taking a breather after being hung over the night before and just sort of getting things back in order again, getting their house in order. And we see that across all these different marketplaces, from high-end wearables to low-end wearables. Action cams, again, there wasn't a ton of releases. We had one today with GoPro, and even that was impressive in the sense of their technology and how they're doing it. Their image quality is mind-boggling on the new Hero 6, but it wasn't like a new camera form factor either. So we'll talk about cameras in a little bit. The same with drones and power meters and trainers. And I just chose this picture because I used a stabilization system on it, and that's the only thing I could think of when I had the word stabilization up there. So all the pictures you see in the slide, by the way, are all ones I've taken at some point over the last year for the most part. This was actually on a Hero 6 Black so this is actually a really interesting picture because there's a ton of tech going on behind it. There's a Hero 6 Black mounted inside of a Karma Grip gimbal strung to a Y-roll cam, which is a cable cam system between two trees 50 meters apart, and then that's all wirelessly controlled by a remote control that I had, and then had a rider in between it, one of the trainer road guys, oddly enough, in between that. So just shows you like all those products are by and large different companies all working together to make the same thing. You know, the cable cam system is something that's working with GoPro, and it's just a whole different layer of stuff all pulled together. So I think, you know, one of the things you start off with is the wearable side and where we are and wearables in general. And the big theme for 2017 is establishing a baseline of what is in these devices. And so some of this started to come together last year in 2016, but now these things that are listed here are all considered the absolute baseline for a wearable device over 120 bucks or so, even over 100 bucks depending on your brand, to have in there. So activity tracking, sleep tracking, optical heart rate is considered the norm now. Smartphone notifications, smartphone apps that may connect to that device. You know, basic interoperability between platforms. You can't go out with a wearable today and expect that you can do it on your own in a silo. Whereas that was the case a few years ago. If you went back to our presentations 3 to 5 years ago, you saw that, you know, people got away with having their own wearable device that connected to no one else. These days, if you do that, it's a complete non-starter. And that's not just for wearables, that's for all sorts of different sport devices across the board. And the same goes with like exporting of data. That used to be something that, again, like 3 to 5 years ago, I just railed on at this event of how people had their silos and you couldn't get data out of it. That's not the case anymore. It's really quite good across the board, and so is interoperability between platforms. And the big theme that we see within the wearables division on that heart rate piece is heart rate itself and all the metrics that you're pulling onto it. Last year, we kind of talked a little bit about the idea that, you know, heart rate has a lot of potential, but it was still just heart rate, or it was still just 24/7 heart rate. Or you may add some metrics around how, you know, recovery was going and stuff like that, but they weren't what was a key selling point on the device. A lot of these devices, whether it be Garmin or Polar or Fitbit, are doing stuff where they're using different metrics here from stress to fitness age and recovery and pulling them together, and that is the key selling point. And it's the point where now consumers look at these devices and go, oh, I want some of these metrics depending on what they are. For some people, it could be recovery metrics, and for others, it could be VO2 max. Now, there are still a lot of room to be made here in terms of making sure this stuff works across the board between devices, and that's something that, you know, is tough for not only Garmin and Polar and Suunto, but also Fitbit and others, to make sure that if someone wears 2 devices or has 2 devices, that they're seeing the same data on both devices. And, you know, one of the things to keep in mind, that companies should keep in mind if they have multiple product lines, is that those are your best customers. Those are the people that are buying the most of your stuff. So these metrics need to work across those devices the best, otherwise you're hurting your best customers, which is not the people you typically want to hurt. We're also seeing this data shift into automated programs and coaching routines. That's something that Fitbit talked about a little bit recently with their guided coaching programs, where it's not just looking at saying, here's what your workout is, but saying, oh, you slept 8 hours last night, yet your resting heart rate was slightly high. You had lower calories, because you told me that, not because I knew, but you had lower calories this day, and your goal is to lose X amount of weight. Here's how all this data pulls together. Now, I suspect some of that won't really be all that awesome in the first few months or first few years, and it probably won't even work that well at all, but that's where we're going. And any company that thinks otherwise is misleading themselves. The idea that you want to take these premium products or premium metrics and pull them into a premium product is what consumers are asking for. We've also seen a slight retreat from fashion. So last year, you know, I showed there was the Garmin Chronos watch at $1,500, and a lot of other brands out there. I'm just singling that one out because it was kind of the prettiest, most expensive, you know, electronic wearable there. But we've seen a retreat from that area from the main companies. You've seen a lot more of the watch make companies add connectivity into those devices at all sorts of crazy price points. But from like the Fitbits and the Garmins and even the Polars of the world, you're seeing pull back a little bit on things like watch bands and those fashion-forward accessories. Fitbit with their new Ionic, for example, dramatically reduced the number of accessory bands that they have there. There's only, I think, like 5 or 6 in total now, compared to what you look at some of the other devices that had to, like, just tables full of devices. And Apple certainly has a lot more flexibility in this because they have the exact same band connector on everything. So for them, adding new bands across the board is super easy, whereas for a lot of you in this room and a lot of the manufacturers, it may be tied into the watch itself and maybe more difficult to do. So it's interesting to see this here. We're also seeing a little bit of aligning of clothing brands to watches. So we saw, of course, Nike plus Apple last year. Now this year we see Fitbit plus Adidas. Both companies were Nike and Adidas tried to do their own thing, and it didn't really work out long term for them, and now going to established players in the market. And we're seeing other companies that are fitness companies or fitness clothing companies that are dabbling in wearables. We saw New Balance with their running watch, not a terribly big success, mostly because you had to go back to the very first slide about companies that died this year, and having Intel be their partner there really hurt them. So interesting, just a lot of different companies in that kind of wearables, and not in the wearable sense, but in the clothing sense, want to get into the game. So standards. Of course, this is a standards conference. It's all about standards. The fact that you all work together here is because of standards. And I think we're seeing some really good progress on this, more than I think in the past few years. So we saw the new standards like the ANT Plus running dynamic standard kind of come to fruition from Garmin, pushing that to ANT Plus. We've seen ANT Plus FEC become the standard across the board except for one trainer, and that trainer hasn't really sold more than 6 units. So that shows you the importance of standards. If you don't follow standards, consumers don't want to use your products. End of story. And Bluetooth FTMS, it's just kind of the equivalent of ANT Plus FEC, is also coming to fruition. We see a lot of companies adopt that fairly quickly. And that's cool as well to see the companies in this room working together to make that kind of stuff happen. A lot of the Bluetooth protocols, whether it be power or the trainer protocol, are a bit iffy, as people in this room know. Like, they're kind of tough to make work together, and we see people struggle a lot. For example, still Bluetooth power meters is a nightmare for most consumers. I've got a Bluetooth power meter that was just released 3 weeks ago that does not work with a head unit, does not work with a Strava app, doesn't work with all these different things, and you can't really blame one person. It's just this whole combination of people that can finger point to each other. But anyways, it was cool to see on the FTMS piece, seeing Trainer Road working with Tax, working with Elite, working with one of them I'm forgetting at the moment, all kind of together, and Trainer Road effectively acting as that mediator to sort out the standard for everyone else, which is just sort of a neat thing to see companies working together, even though they're all competitors in the space from a trainer standpoint, saying we're going to figure this out because consumers demand it. And then finally, running power down the bottom there is something that obviously you just saw in the presentation an hour ago or so, about running power now potentially having a track towards becoming a standard maybe, but more or less becoming more mainstream. And that's where we see there's a lot of companies that are doing running power stuff today. I think 3 or 4 off the top of my head that are doing stuff. And the same also goes, by the way, for advanced cycling metrics. Also in the last presentation, we saw the formation of a TWG to do cycling dynamics, having Garmin essentially release their stranglehold on what used to be vector-only cycling dynamics and moving to something that the entire industry can use. Of course, at this point, it's up to the people in this room to take a hold of some of these things and run with them. I mean, that's ultimately, you have to look at these metrics and say, yes, we want to implement our products, whether it be in sensors or be in head units or be in apps. If you don't do that, then they'll die. So, I'd say, like, from my perspective, looking at these things, Garmin's released control of some of these things. It's up to you to run with it. And if you don't run with it, consumers only have one person to blame now, and it's not Garmin anymore. It's the people in this room for not taking the standards and running with them. So consumers want it. It's cool stuff. You can look, in fact, at Trainer Road's post, or the post I did on Trainer Road last week at Interbike to see that, where they use the new vectors integration there for cycling dynamics, and to see the number of consumers that said, oh, that's great for vector, but when can I have it on my PowerTap P1? When can I have it on my Pioneer? When can I have it on my this? All these other companies out there. And so that's the sort of integration that I want to see across the board. Next, cycling devices. Without question, the war has begun between Garmin and GoPro here for at least the mid-range cycling unit. You know, we've seen that over the last year, essentially between the Edge 520 and really the Wahoo Bolt, more than necessarily the Wahoo Element by itself, but the Bolt, the smaller edition one. So that's something that's really cool. It's great for consumers, and we saw all summer long both companies kind of going back and forth like a volley on new features between those devices, new rollouts, new announcements between those devices, and it's great for consumers. Consumers are loving it. They're getting products that are better than ever before, and they're getting more features than ever before, and it's good for companies because they're getting more interest in their products as well. At the same time, we've also got kind of a greater battle brewing behind the scenes for brands that aren't as well known. So for example, Hammerhead and Stages in the head unit game anyways are releasing products, and there's more coming down the road. And then also companies like Lezyne is working in this space too. And there's just a lot of options out there now, which is great. And again, more competition is great for consumers as well as being great for, I think, companies, because there's an opportunity to, you know, really make your product to the next, or kick your product to the next level. Also seeing a bit of progress finally on routing and navigation. I feel like routing and navigation and workouts, which we'll talk about in a second, are like the two areas that everyone hates to innovate on because they're hard. Like, doing routing and navigation on a cycling device is messy. There's a lot of ways you can screw it up. And people tend to get really, really upset when you've sent them 50 miles the wrong way. So it's something that it's been tough for people to see innovation there, and we haven't really seen a whole lot. I think now, though, in the last year, we saw, you know, Wahoo on the Element side start to do better integration of mapping to providers, so pulling in from Strava and Keynote and Map My Ride, Ride with GPS. I just saw a demo like an hour ago with what Hammerhead's doing on navigation stuff with Strava. It's super cool. You can pull a route in from Strava into your Hammerhead account, and then from there you can actually tweak it on your account and then send it to your device. Whereas right now, you know, if you have any route on any platform that you've got from someone else that you've stolen or borrowed, even your own route, and you want to like move that middle dot in the middle of the route to somewhere else, like, you might as well just give up and try over on something else, because it's almost impossible on every platform out there. And then to get it to a head unit in a seamless manner is almost impossible as well. Seeing what they're doing there is incredibly cool stuff, and it's things that you look at and go, why hasn't this been done before? Why is it so difficult? And I think sometimes I'm an interesting use case for that, because I travel so much and I'm in hotels with bad Wi-Fi or no cell phone signal or something like that, where I want to be able to very easily make a change to a route and then go out for a ride and not have to have like a whole bunch of things happen to make that occur. And so it's cool to see this. Also seeing more connected devices like helmets. There was at least 2 or 3 different brands out there of helmets today or last week at Interbike. So some of that stuff is still kind of just wobbling around and trying to find a place in life, but I think there's definitely potential there. And then we'll talk more about power meter stabilization, and finally connected lights is an area that seeing some great progress in the last year with brands adding in ANT+ for connectivity and Bluetooth smart connectivity. And particularly ANT+ connectivity is most interesting here because of the fact that it's enabling connectivity to head units, and that, you know, would lead to potentially more safe riding conditions when someone forgets to turn on that tail light, to have that automatically turn on for them. So that's pretty cool stuff. So structured workouts, I kind of just mentioned a second ago. This was sort of the second area where companies really just didn't want to deal with this. Like, it's been long been forgotten. Like, you had your coach and you're like, the coach guy over there, yeah, he just sends me the workouts on Excel and hope for the best. Because he knew that if he tried to figure out the platforms behind it, he'd want to just jump off a bridge because they were so messy to deal with across the board. But we've seen some really good stuff here that's more than just training plans. You know, training plans and structured workouts have been around for a number of years across all the major platforms, but it's getting to the point where you can do cross-platform integration of these things. The idea that I can pull a training plan from Training Peaks into my Garmin or into my Wahoo unit, or I can do something on today's plan into Stages, is pretty cool stuff. And I think Stages is really actually leading this area right now when it comes to the cycling side anyways, where what they're doing with their platform, you know, basically the rebrand of today's plan and their Stages Dash device is super, super cool if you haven't seen that before. You can get graded on each given segment. You're seeing this all both in real time as well as afterwards on the site itself, color-coded what you did and didn't do well. You can repeat segments. I mean, it's really, really cool stuff if you're an athlete that's really focused on a given workout or structured plan. Same time, we're seeing at the opposite end of the spectrum, Fitbit going in with their premium coaching services that'll start up next year in Q1 to be able to do that kind of whole like holistic health coaching thing I talked about earlier of being able to take sleep along with food and finding this path for you, but to use the device and the actual data from the device. You know, there's plenty of health plans out there that don't use device data. They say on Monday you should do this, on Tuesday you should do this, but they don't take into account what's happening in your life, whereas that's Fitbit's plan is to look at stuff and go, oh, you slept 2 hours last night, you should skip your run today because it's not really going to help you at all. In the last year, we've seen kind of this totally new category explode here around aerodynamics, and we've been talking about this for years here. I mean, Alpha Mantis was here, I think, like 4 or 5 years ago, a long time ago, showing off their stuff, and it's finally the point where it's not yet in consumers' hands, but it's super duper close. And we've got, 4, I would say, players right now, plus a bunch more. Some of you are in the room here. So Notio, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. I know I'm pronouncing that wrong, which of course is Argon 18 spinoff that they showed last year at Eurobike and then again this year. They're very, very close. Alpha Mantis, which Garmin, of course, bought. Aerolab, which no one's bought yet, but I believe the bidding starts this afternoon if you want, out in the hallway. They're still here. VeloSense is also here and is also on the auction block as well. So anyways, the point is there's these companies, they're all out there, they're all doing cool stuff. They're all sort of not quite there yet though. They've got ideas, they've got products, they've got things that I've gone out for test rides on half of these anyways. And so they're functional, but getting them to the point of being a product in a consumer's hand is a whole different ballgame for some of these companies. And so I think the approach that Argon 18 is taking with a multi-tier productization of saying we're going to have a kind of lower end option, and low end's all relative here, by the way, because you're talking aerodynamics, so you've already like self-selected a group of the population out of here. But to have a lower end option that's not trying to give you CDA values, but giving you, yes, this position is faster, or no, this position is slower in real time is hugely beneficial to the vast majority of triathletes out there, as well as road cyclists, to be able to sit there in the middle of an Ironman 4 or 5 hours in and have something go, no, you've just slacked off your position, and that's costing you X amount of time, whether it's costing you straight minutes or it's costing you wattage or whatever metric you want to use. To have someone see that feedback as they're exhausted is super helpful. And then to have that next tier up where it's showing you CDA values and stuff that kind of the front of the pack person or the more advanced person can take advantage of. And then finally, the third level is around the coaching. And a coach can go out with athletes of all categories and use these devices and get that person in a better fit position. I do, though, still think that aerodynamics and all these products are really about having real-time feedback. So as valuable it is to go out with a coach and do something position-wise, whether it be in a wind tunnel or on the road, if that person can't have that feedback in real time in the middle of a race, in the middle of training, I think it's tough for them to benefit that long term, because these position changes could be literally a centimeter or less of your head movement, of anything. It's tough to replicate that 6 months later after that test or coaching session. Power meters. So power meters in 2016 was bonkers. There were so many brands that tried to get into it, so many brands that were already there that released new products. So 2017 saw a bit of a all quiet on the Western Front. I think a lot of the brands that were in it released moderate or minor product enhancements or updates in 2017, and it's a tough market. I mean, these brands here all are either out of business or essentially out of business, whether it be Lux, RPM, Look, Keo, Limits, Ashton Instruments, Luck, Dynovella, Expedo. These are all brands that a year ago had grand plans. And these days, you don't hear from them anymore. And like I said, they're not necessarily technically dead, but from a productization standpoint, there's no news. And after a year, I kind of put you in the no news equals you're dead category, at least if you've gone to a show and announced something. Yet we've got sort of this I don't want to call them mid-tier, because the products are awesome on all these companies, but they're essentially teenagers, right? These companies here, 4i Stages, Rotor, Pioneer, Verve, and Favero, are teenagers in the grand scheme of the power meter continuum of life, right? So they're not like SRM or Quark or PowerTap from being around 20 plus years, but they are producing just as awesome products as those same companies. And that's what's really cool to see, because these companies here are now driving that price point down lower and lower and lower. Favero, for example, has their dual pedal system down to $735 US for left-right power and 2 pedals. That's accurate, that's durable. They've had, they're on their 2nd gen product now. And most of these companies here are indeed on their 2nd or 3rd gen product. So they're not just a startup that you have to trust works out, but they're much further along, which is pretty cool. At the same time, that doesn't mean the big companies are just sitting back and doing nothing. They're doing cool stuff. They're innovating. They're also just that stable ship, right? You look at them and you go, yeah, that should be a good product, and it should work just out of the box. And for the most part, it does. But you still want to test and validate these sort of things. I think the biggest opportunity for all these companies, though, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is taking advantage of those advanced metrics. Each one of these companies over the past X number of years has had advanced metrics, and none of them have ever played together. And that's why, by and large, there's no uptake of it. You look at some of this stuff, and you wonder why people aren't using this metric or that metric from these different companies. And it's because it's hard to use behind the scenes. There's, the fitness platforms barely support them. I think WKO Plus is doing some support of these now. I think Sport Tracks is as well, but it's super slim. It's very, very limited, very, very narrow as to what they're supporting. It's not like I can look across this entire room and say, oh yeah, all of you guys are doing stuff in this area. Like I could look across this entire room and say, oh yeah, all of you guys support cadence, all you guys support power, all you guys support heart rate. I would have to like pick which chairs support any sort of advanced cycling metrics, and it's few and far between. So power meters are getting cheaper still. So this is an updated chart as of this morning of the pricing over the last 6-7 years, basically. And you can just see it continues to plummet. It's also interesting to see how many more brands keep getting added in here. And I know I'm missing a few as well, I thought about. But this, like, you start off way back just 6 years ago, and there was really only 3 brands here that were playing in this space that are still here anyways. And you go down, and as we go further on, more and more brands get into it, and more the price continues to drop. Now we've got Watt Team, the Power Beat just announced last week at Interbike, $259 for a left-only power meter. I mean, that's nuts for a direct force power meter. And the same, their dual system is $399 for a dual left-right power meter. We've got other brands at also the price points above that, but it's just impressive to see this entire track, and I can expect to see this entire track will go down further over time. In a lot of ways, trainers was much like power meters over the last year. It's a bit of a quiet year, a bit of a regrouping year. We saw that a ton of brands announced products at Interbike and Eurobike in 2016 a year ago, and then a ton of brands were delayed on delivering those products. And those delays stretched out all the way into February and March of this past year before companies caught up, not just with demand, but caught up with actually getting their products into people's hands that were functional. And so this year, I think, it didn't make a lot of sense for companies to release a bunch of new trainers after they just finished releasing trainers 4 months ago. And so we saw it pretty quiet across the board. I'd say, the one obvious winner in this entire year of trainers was Elite with their Diretto trainer. So this basically was this $899 trainer that undercut others on accuracy, so it was more accurate than that price point had been in the past. Still direct drive, a bit quieter than other trainers out there. So it kind of found that perfect balance of price versus function. Just like last year, Tax and their Tax Flux sort of took this spot, and we're seeing companies continue to drive that price of what used to be high-end functions and trainers down a bit lower. I think we're also seeing a bit of a shift to an Apple-like kind of release schedule. Wahoo's certainly doing that with the Wahoo Kicker Snap and the regular Kicker trainer being on the 3rd generation, and just doing minor tweaks to each one. So nothing huge, but just saying this is our 2017 edition, this is our 2016 edition. Once the 2017 edition comes out, the previous editions are no longer available, and just kind of making things super clean across the board. I still think, though, all eyes are on trainer apps to figure out how to use all these things. And that's where there's so much potential. Obviously, you've got big ones like Zwift and TrainerRoad, but you have this plethora of 20-plus other trainer apps that are out there today that are doing amazing things and are just as cool. And it's neat to see that these smaller companies can compete for consumers' dollars as the same as these bigger companies by doing something that's not a big company's thing, right? So there's tons and tons of examples of that. I've got usually I post in the next couple of weeks a full trainer app guide of sorts that has all the apps out there that interact with these trainers, and it's just really neat to see that sort of integration across the board. At the same time, we've also seen a bit of a year with trainer experimentation. So Wahoo made this. So it's they made a bike rodeo machine essentially. So the Kicker Climb, Tax made a $10,000 9,000 euro trainer treadmill thing. It's just Wattbike on the other side. This is all experimentation type stuff. Wattbike released the Wattbike Atom, which was half the price of their original Wattbike, but way better, way more powerful. And in their case, and I think in most of these people's cases, they've been highly successful. You look at things like Wattbike, and people are clamoring over this product because they just nailed it. They nailed the price point, they nailed the functions, they nailed a solid, beautiful looking product. Whereas in the past, I think think people looked at Wattbike was sort of like a CompuTrainer in a way, is like kind of a bit slow to innovate, a bit slow to move, and this time they perfect. And to be fair, like with Wahoo's case here, people are clamoring for these products. Like people want these products so much, it's nuts. I mean, the stats that I have, like on whether it be YouTube or my site or anything, or Facebook shares for this thing, is nuts. Like it's just absolutely nuts, and people are so excited about this. But what's cool is that it gives you an opportunity to consider making those premium products. I mean, this is an expensive product. It's $599 or $699. It's expensive, and it's not something that's going to fit in everyone's living room. And it doesn't mean that you should be afraid to create something like this if you can do it right. And I think that's a case where Wahoo obviously did it right. Certainly, there's plenty of examples around the Interbike or Eurobike show floor where you look at products and go, no, that's just stupid and expensive. Like it has to be cool and expensive to make it be done right, and it has to have some sort of like sex appeal or something to it to make it interesting, or just has to go up and down. Your choice. Speaking of Wattbike, so this is an interesting area because it's something that it's a bit of a new category, kind of. I mean, obviously, Cyclops and plenty of other indoor bike trainers have been here for years, but not to the point of being totally compatible with things across the board. And that's why I'm kind of giving like this a bit of a different definition of being new with these three core areas. It has to either have ANT plus FEC in it for control of that trainer, it has to have the Bluetooth Smart Equivalency, FTMS, for control of that indoor bike, or your name has to be Peloton. As long as you're one of those three, then you're good to go. And that's what's really cool about this, is that you're seeing companies do stuff in this space that they didn't do before. The Wattbike example of getting into it and going, oh wow, Wattbike's now compatible with Zwift, it's now compatible with TrainerRoad. Actually, no wait, it's compatible with 20 more apps out there overnight by adopting those two standards. And of course, a lot of this is chasing after the Peloton model. So look at the Peloton indoor spin bike platform thing, and assuming that you can take that same model and pull it into indoor bikes for the greater cycling world. And I'm not sure that's necessarily accurate. I don't think there is room for 5 to 10 brands to do indoor bikes like Wattbike or like the Tacx Neo Smart bike they announced this year, or others that are out there like Be Cool also announced a bike. I just don't think there is that much room in the marketplace to have 5 to 10 brands all with $1,500 to $3,000 bikes out there. And a lot of that, of course, is again being driven by this ideal to be like Peloton, to be in people's living rooms and attract a different market. But the problem is that that is the challenge. They are different markets. The Peloton consumer is a very different consumer than the person who's buying a $1,500, $1,600 smart trainer today. Like the person who buys a Tacx Neo is not the same person who buys a Peloton. There is occasionally some crossover, but they are different audiences. And to assume that you can scale out to some of the numbers I've heard just doesn't really make sense. So I would caution brands to just be cautious on going out and like everyone wants an indoor bike, because I don't necessarily think that's the case. So, fitness platforms. Let me do my time. Too bad. So all was pretty quiet here as well in 2016. Essentially, Under Armour ran out of people to acquire. And so at this point, they've acquired everyone, or anyone else just went out of business. So we've seen a bit more innovation on the smaller trainer platforms. Like the Final Surge and the Today's Plan, they're not necessarily new to the game, but they've had like a revitalized interest in themselves, or consumers have revitalized interest in them. And it's neat to see. Like I'm getting way more emails on a weekly basis from new training platforms that are out there that want to be part of this game. Now, of course, the challenge, though, is to make yourself unique and innovative. And that's one of the things that's really, really tough in training platforms, is that the curve to get into this marketplace is just ginormous. You have to start off with, here's an activity, here's what they did, here's where they went. But then you look down the road and you see someone like Training Peaks or even Today's Plan or others, and there's so much nuance to training plan platforms that it takes a long time to get to the end of that stage. All these little 1% items. It's the same as bike computers. The 1% items kill you on bike computers because there are so many 1% things that, for me, I might not care about a feature, or I might have never even used that feature in my life before. And then for the next person down the road, that is the most important thing to them, and they will scream all day long if that particular feature is not in there. And so it's really tough with training platforms, especially because training platforms then have coaches, and coaches are finicky peoples, as they should be, but they're really finicky when it comes to this sort of thing and making sure that things work the way they expect. But we are seeing cool stuff, as I mentioned earlier, on the whole workout sync thing. We're seeing now the point where you have training platforms actually working with devices as opposed to just a training platform and a device. Garmin and Training Peaks early this past spring, Wahoo as well joining them this past summer, and then Stages there with their own platform too. So again, we're seeing that sort of progress on these platforms. So action cams. Action cams is always lots of fun, and we're seeing a lot of cool stuff when it comes to 360 action cams. That's sort of the thing to do in 2017. And there's been a lot of talk about 360 in the last couple of years, but I don't think we finally hit our stride until this year because the quality just frankly sucked. You went out there and you filmed this thing on a camera that was, quote, 4K. But once you put it on YouTube or whatever else, you looked at it and it looked like the Paris Hilton video from years ago. Like it just didn't look all that clear. And that's because, of course, you take a 4K image that's spherical, and then you have to look at it on YouTube and you're seeing this little piece of it. That image piece there is not 4K. That is like 720 in a good best case scenario. And so our expectations are not met when we see that. Now though, we see Garmin's Verb 360 camera filming at 5.7K, GoPro's Fusion camera at 5.2K, and now the quality is finally catching up where you can watch a video and go, damn, that's pretty cool. It looks cool. Like you don't get lost by the resolution because of the fact that you're looking first at the experience, and the resolution just is what you'd expect it to be. Still, this is going to be a long road because you still have to figure out how to get consumers to consume this content. Even phones struggle in a lot of this today, whether it's creating the content or consuming the content. And the same goes for PCs and other desktops that are out there, laptops, et cetera, have a really tough time in displaying this stuff at high enough resolutions that makes consumers interested in it. We're also seeing software taking center stage on a lot of these things. So whether it's Garmin or GoPro innovating on the action cam software front, both are pushing the boundaries there and making automation of this stuff a lot easier to the point now where normal consumers that are not, video people can actually put together an edit that looks appealing, at least for 30 seconds or so. And that's pretty cool. I think that's where you get to people saying, yeah, I'm going to go buy this action camera because I can easily pull it into my phone and share it out to Instagram and be good to go. And that's actually a good point here in general about social platforms is that, like, for me on Strava, I make a rule, a practice, whatever you want to call it, to always upload an image with my workout. That's just like my thing. I want to have it there because I think it looks pretty, if nothing else. And then from like a social engagement standpoint, other people think it looks pretty. And so that's an area where I think across the board, there's lots of potential for different platforms to include the imagery into their individual platforms, whether it be the Garmin Connects of the world, training platforms, to have that there and go, oh, this is why or what I did that day. It's not just another workout that looks like a bunch of graph stuff. It's, oh, I went up a gigantic mountain or whatever it may be. It's cool stuff. Finally, drone pricing has just reduced dramatically. We've seen that now where you've got incredibly capable and functional drones from well-known brands down to $500 like the DJI Spark that was released this past summer. At the point where I'm not taking with me high-end drones anymore. I'm taking with me this tiny little drone that's like this big, and I'm shooting epic shots and epic footage from it. And I'll show you a shot a little bit later on taken from it from something that's $499, which is astounding. So what are we going to see over the next little while, over the next year, essentially, till next year? The first one is, I think, continued work on optical heart rate. So it's gotten a lot better in the last year, to the point where most mainstream companies are doing it mostly right. Not perfect, but mostly right. But it's funny, so as part of like the reviewer stuff I get with different products, different brands send me a whole bunch of like documentation for different products. And one thing that came up in the Fitbit Ionix reviewer guide, all this paperwork, was this little section here. And I know it's kind of tough to read, but essentially it says to reviewers, to media, to press, etc., to please not test multiple devices on the same wrist, multiple optical heart rate sensors on the same wrist. And it's something that's been a big problem for, I see in the mainstream media all the time where you'll have like a USA Today guy or whoever who has got like 9 watches all lined up and then wonders why none of them are accurate. And that's because they don't work that way. Like if you put multiple optical heart rate sensors together next to each other, they will conflict with each other in a bunch of different ways and you get bad data. But I don't necessarily blame that on the press. The press doesn't necessarily know about all the intricacies of these devices. I blame it on the companies. Like, you should be out in front of this and saying to, when you send out review devices, hey, here's the way you should do it. And Fitbit did a great job of this. This entire paragraph talks about how to test. It talks about realistic conditions. It talks about all sorts of stuff. it's genius, and they sent it out to every media person that they sent a device to, or anyone else who gets the media reviewer's guide on how to use their device, and that'll in turn help the reviews because they'll be getting realistic data. Now, it won't help them if their product sucks, but it'll at least help them avoid bad data to begin with. And that's something that we're seeing as well in academia. There was a dismal study this past summer, spring from Stanford on this that just really screwed up doing this sort of thing, and in a way that I would never expected an institution that big to screw up on how they do their testing to the point where the entire study was useless because they had all these unrealistic conditions of stacking up a bunch of watches next to each other and then doing things the wrong way. It was just an example of it's not just the press and the mainstream media, it's also academia that needs to learn how to do these studies if you're going to be in this particular area. Again, all things that impact you as wearable companies when people are using your products the wrong way and then sending out stuff on that. Going back up a little bit, GPS accuracy in the next year, I think this is something that we could see improve. There's certainly been a lot of talk, even in the last few days, around new GPS chips coming to cell phones that are in a centimeter accuracy next year. I'd say the core thing to keep in mind is we don't want to sacrifice GPS accuracy for battery life too much, right? That's, I think, the balance everyone's trying to go with here. Same goes for size. When you get to the point where the device isn't useful anymore because the accuracy is too bad, even though it's really small, you've sort of defeated your point. And then, yeah, talked about academia and media already as something that you need to get smarter about. Group fitness, another area that it's really going to be interesting to see what happens over the next year or so. You've got these major platforms like Zwift and Peloton and others, but they're very different. Like Peloton and Zwift are very different platforms behind the scenes. Peloton, you're looking at an instructor that's in real time, a real human in a real place with other real humans, versus Zwift, you're riding with real humans in another place, but you're not seeing them. And I think finding the point where those two platforms start to validate their features across their features to be able to see humans in Zwift would be incredible, and to be able to see people when you're riding on a workout with a bunch of other people at the same time is where that's going, to be able to see other people, because that's what's motivating about Peloton, right? Peloton's exciting not because it's a spin bike, it's because you're seeing actual humans somewhere else. That makes that indoor training experience slightly less sucky. At the same time, this will continue to further endanger cycling studios, just to the point where cycling studios are like getting their big break of having all this cool automated trainer stuff. You've got to the point where why would I go down the street to the cycling studio when I can do this in my house and see the same people? So those studios will have to find ways to make themselves still relevant, and I think the only way to really do that is to get to the point where people love and want to, or want to crave to be there, right? The SoulCycle example of they're going there for the greater experience, they're not going there just to have a workout. And that's something that's going to be tough for smaller cycling studios that are just one-off, with 10 or 15 trainers somewhere to go ahead and do. Over the next year, I think we'll see a lot of cool stuff in the cycling realm, primarily around aero that I talked about earlier. That's essentially going to be power meters all over again over the next year. We're going to have amazing successes, and we're going to have dismal failures and everything in between. And that's just the way a new market segment works. I think the tire sensor that Hutchison showed off at Eurobike, and I believe they're here as well, it could be really, really cool if standards support it. So if it can be supported on head units across the board, then that's something that could take off and it's priced appropriately. If it's not supported on head units, it's a non-starter. It's dead out of the water. And so it's something that it's super important for any new technology. And that's the same as aero sensors as well, by the way. If aero sensors aren't supported natively on head units, they're more or less dead for the larger consumer crowd. So standards, I mentioned earlier, I think we did a good job in 2016 or 2017 of last year of things, but I think we're going to see faster adoption throughout the rest of the year and into 2018. Some of the work that's being done here is certainly leading towards that. One thing to note is that I think companies are now getting to the point where they realize that a private protocol isn't considered a competitive advantage anymore. The idea that you have this secret protocol that works with just your own stuff, consumers don't want that. They want something that works with everything across the board. They expect that. They expect that you'll be able to go and work with any other device. And it's really, really important. I think it's also something that drives sales. People say, oh, that works with this? Great, I'm going to buy both. Doesn't work with either? I'm not going to buy either. So it's cool stuff. I think also interoperability between platforms is another area that we'll see advancements next year. We saw a lot of that this year, though, as I mentioned, like the whole trainer road to Garmin, or Training Peaks to Garmin, or Wahoo to Training Peaks, or Wahoo. I mean, everyone's starting to work with each other, and not just by sending files, but by actually having bilateral communications between these two devices or platforms. Speaking of which, consumers are demanding everything works with everything, and that's probably obvious by this point in the presentation, but that is absolutely the expectation. And platforms like Strava and Training Peaks are considered baseline for a wearables endurance sport type device out there today. And the same goes for like lower end wearables. MyFitnessPal is in that same camp of being a baseline requirement to interact with these platforms across the board. But they're starting to expect more than just file sharing. So the common requests I hear are sleep data, step data, weight scale data, and of course structured workouts. So all the other stuff that I talked about way in the beginning of the presentation on heart rate sensor data and recovery and training load, they want to see that across devices. They want to see their Garmin's training load and recovery status show up in Training Peaks and have those numbers match across the board. And I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity again for cross collaboration between companies. On the action camera side, the biggest challenge will be figuring out how to make 360 video consumable to the masses. As I mentioned earlier, it's tricky to get this stuff to play back correctly and to the point where it looks good. So that's really going to be a challenge for everyone to figure out. And of course, the usual challenge of terminology, as we heard in a presentation a day or two ago. 360 isn't VR, it isn't AI, it isn't something else. It's a thing by itself. You can layer them on top of each other, but individually, they're individual things. And so it's something to keep in mind. The accessory market for action cam stuff is just getting super cool. Like the number of really astounding innovations out there where people are capturing crazy views and stuff like that using action cams and accessories, there's so much potential there. So you saw earlier that picture I did with like the whole cable cam setup. That's an example of one. But you're getting people with that now. You're getting to the point where people can now capture new angles. And so like this here, I shot this myself a couple weeks ago in the Swiss Alps from a drone of myself riding around the corner there. I mean, this is an epic shot on a $499 drone. This is the DJI Spark. I mean, this is incredible, like to have the point where I got this all up and down and I timed myself, I looked at it. From the moment I got off the bike and set everything up and to the moment I went down the hill again, it was 8 minutes all in. And like 4 of that minutes was me just getting other footage for another video that was totally unrelated. Like I could have done this all in 3 to 4 minutes, ready to go, done. And it's so easy with just my phone. And I put this drone in my back pocket cycling for a 5-hour ride. And it stayed there just fine. No problems with sweat, no problems with size. It was just there. I mean, that's incredible stuff. And you're seeing more of this kind of stuff within the drone market. I think one of the limitations will be not just size anymore, but sound and noise. I mean, people's association with drones is this like angry hive of buzzing bees coming towards you. So to get rid of that is really tough. And DJI is doing a lot of work with that. If you look at their drones from just 2 years ago, they're a million times louder, I mean, not a million, but they're way, way louder than the DJI Spark is. For their new Mavic series, they just released a few weeks ago. They put out new propellers that are, I think, either 30 or 50% quieter, just the propellers, and you can buy those and retrofit them to your old ones. So that's the kind of stuff that will really help, but ultimately it has to get to the point where it's almost silent before people aren't afraid of it. And if people aren't afraid of drones, then they're not going to put a bunch of crazy regulations around it, which isn't to say regulations aren't important. I really think they are in the drone world, but I think some of them just go too far because of fear. They're afraid of that angry hive of bees. So last but not least, what's the biggest opportunities this year? I think, again, cross-platform communications. We saw how successful this was for Strava and Garmin for both sides of that equation. In the case of Strava, that boosted their premium memberships. In the case of Garmin, it boosted people buying their devices because they wanted things like Strava Live segments on there. Those are, obviously like the pinnacle of examples of partnerships, but there's plenty more out there. The biggest thing, though, is to make devices that users crave. You want to the point where people aspire to own that device, whether it be a $150 device or a $600 device. You want to go ahead and have people go, yes, I want that. Even if there's no valid reason to want that, I want that device. And that's how you make a successful product. And again, don't make budget devices feel like budget devices. Make budget devices that may be on less expensive hardware, but have a platform behind it that's just awesome, a software platform, the user interface, that is awesome. And then last but not least, as always, just make cool shit. If you do that, you'll win every single time. So one quick thing before we wrap up here is a lot of people ask this all the time, and so to save you some questions, oops, oh no, I can't go back, on how you engage with me from a review standpoint, I generally do roughly like 3 types of reviews. I have first looks and hands-on reviews, so if you've got a product that isn't quite done yet and may not be done for a long time, those are the type of posts that I do. I've also got in-depth reviews where you have a product that is final or essentially final from a software or especially a hardware standpoint, and that's when I kind of work on those. Both of these can take different time periods, so an in-depth review could take a few weeks depending on how small the product is, like a simple activity tracker, or it could be a few months for a power meter where I really want to get the data across many different conditions and kind of environmental circumstances. And whereas the first look posts tend to be much quicker, they could be something that's I put together in under an hour, or they could be something that's much longer depending again on what your product is and how complex it is. 3 last things is on ways to talk with me. I'm happy to have NDA discussions under embargo, NDA, whatever you want to call it, so that I can do that well in advance. So if you want just general feedback on your product a year out, I'm happy to provide that. And to be clear on all this stuff, I don't charge for this. I don't take or want any of your money. This is just me having a chat with you about something. I've done that with many of you this week already for things that could be coming out next week or could be coming out next year. The next method is kind of a timed review for product launch, where I'm going to go ahead and work to whatever your embargo date is down to the second. So if you have an announcement at 4:15 p.m. on a given day, I'm going to be at 4:15 p.m. That's kind of my goal there. And then post-release review, so something that's already in the marketplace, has been in the marketplace for a while, and then you think it's something that I might be appealing to me if it's got like a gadgety nature to it. I will warn you though in general that these bottom ones are the ones that are the least likely to make it through my gigantic stack of stuff, because in a lot of ways it's already out there. If it's out there and I haven't already looked at it, then it may be less interesting or whatever. So it's on the totem pole, it's way, way down the totem pole. And unfortunately, it's a really big totem pole. So with that, thank you very much for your time. I'm here tonight for any more questions, and then my contact information is down at the bottom if you want to follow up for anything else afterwards.